Hello and welcome back. In the history of most nations, there's an event or series of events that defines the character of that nation. Often a crisis or crises will come along that force the people of that nation to examine what their priorities are. Another way of looking at this is to say that historians will often look back at a crisis or a series of crises and pull out from that certain characteristics they think they can take away about the nation that encountered these crises. For us in the United States, we could say that it's our Revolutionary War, our Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, or even 9/11. For the Romans, nothing could be more defining than the Punic Wars. What are the Punic Wars? There are 3 Punic Wars that the Romans fought from the mid-200s down to the mid-100s BCE against the state of Carthage. Why are they called Punic Wars? Because Punicus is the Latin adjective that means Carthaginian. So when we say Punic, we really mean Carthaginian. Well, where is Carthage? Carthage is right here in what is now Tunisia in North Africa. And we can see that it's actually not that far from Rome, even though they're on 2 different continents. In fact, you can take a ferry from here to here. It only takes a couple of hours. Well, who are the Carthaginians? Carthaginians are people who came from over here in Tyre, which is now Lebanon, and settled in North Africa during the beginning of the Archaic Age. Let's go into their history a little bit, shall we? It was settled in 814 BCE by settlers from Tyre. Their founder was a legendary character named Elissa. The Libyans who were there in that region at that time, however, called her Dido, meaning the wanderer. The local kings tried to trick Dido. They told her this: you can have as much land as you can enclose in an ox hide. So Dido, being clever, did the following thing. She had the hide of 1 ox, and you can see it here, cut into tiny, tiny strips of twine that were very, very thin. And then she had these bits of twine bound together. And in so doing, she was able to enclose a very large space inside a long bit of string made out of an ox hide. This space that she was able to get from the local kings came to be called the bursa, which is the local word for ox hide. And the high city or citadel of Carthage came to be called the bursa from then on. In the modern calculus of variations, the problem of how to enclose the maximum amount of space within a fixed boundary is often referred to as the Dido problem. In the oldest traditions of the story, Dido actually escapes marrying one of the local Libyan kings by committing suicide. She throws herself onto a burning funeral pyre and dies that way. Business goes on in real-life Carthage, however. And Carthage would become a massive trade empire and have an economy that would rival its mother city of Tyre. Its trade empire would come to occupy much of North Africa. We can see all this purple stuff on the map is actually Carthage. And all of this stuff in Spain is Carthaginian by the mid-3rd century BCE. In 509, in fact, the Carthaginians even signed a treaty with Rome, agreeing that they would carry on business amicably with each other and not fight over trade territories. What were the Carthaginians like? Well, their government was composed of a council of elders, or senate, kind of like the Romans, with monarchs that were nominally in charge. So this is definitely an archaic age institution where we have monarchs still around and serving in a control capacity, especially over the military, but with a governing body of elders making a lot of the real decisions. What was their language like? Well, it was Phoenician, and Phoenician is a Semitic language similar to Arabic or Hebrew, and this is the script in which Phoenician is written. What kind of religion did they have? They were polytheistic, like the Romans, and this means that they worshipped a lot of gods. At the top of their pantheon, or group of gods, were Tanit, and here she is to the right. She's a fertility goddess, and shown here with a lion's head. And Baal-Hamon. And Baal-Hamon is a sky god, not unlike Zeus or Jupiter for the Romans. Something you'll hear a lot if you look up Carthaginian religion is this rumor, this nasty rumor of infant sacrifice. It's said that many people, even nobles, sacrificed their children when they were babies to the god Baal. The evidence we have for this kind of goes both ways. I can believe they did this. It's also possible for me to see that a lot of the evidence we have about this was actually written by people who hated the Carthaginians. So who knows? How do they dress? What do they look like? It's really hard to say. One of our best ways of guessing at this is by looking at a religious votive object found in Spain at the beginning of the last century. And if you've probably looked at the cover of your textbook in this class and wondered more than once what that thing is on the front, I'll tell you what it is. It's the bust of a woman or goddess. And here she has this splendid headdress with earrings, necklaces, and a robe. And this at least gives us an idea of what the Carthaginians thought a high-class person might have looked like. The peace wasn't to last with Rome, however. And for reasons that are really complicated, and I will only go into so much here, the Romans and the Carthaginians came into conflict in 264 BCE. How did this happen? There was a local squabble going on near Syracuse here in Sicily. And the Romans, who had an alliance with the king of Syracuse, got involved. The Carthaginians got involved with the other side of this squabble, and a proxy war started. That is, where bigger powers jump in and fight on either side of a local or regional conflict. Before long, the Carthaginians and the Romans were actually fighting with each other. And as you can see, Sicily is cut off from mainland Italy by the Mediterranean. This conflict would actually force the Romans to get involved with fighting a battle at sea. The problem was that the Romans didn't actually really have a navy at this point. They were a landlocked power, kind of like the Spartans used to be. However, the Romans were able to capture a Carthaginian warship and reverse engineer it and build their own fleet. The Carthaginians used these Hellenistic-style trireme type ships. Some of them were pentaconters as well, that had battering rams on the front. You can see this bronze battering ram here. And this boat would actually sit pretty low in the water, about where this line is. Basically, it's a torpedo that you would use to ram another ship from the side like so. And this required a lot of coordination on the part of your crew. You would actually slam your boat into the deck of the other ship and back out as quickly as you could with your rowers going backwards. The danger of this, though, is you could lose your own ship because your ship might sink in the struggle. The Romans were quickly able to not only get pretty good at sailing, but to figure out a way around this problem. They engineered something called the corvus, or crow. And this was a plank. It was attached to a mast like this that could be swung around so that when you came up near an enemy ship, you could drop it through the deck of their ship, allowing your marines to board and carry on the fight as if it were a land battle, only on boats. There were a couple of advantages of this. You stood a very good chance of not losing your own ship, and in the process, you might gain a new ship for your own navy. Most of the fighting of this war occurred around the island of Sicily. And the result of this war was that the Romans gained possession of Sicily, Sardinia, and later Corsica. Your takeaway from this war should be this, though. The Romans sometimes lost tens of thousands of sailors and soldiers in one go in a storm as they were sailing around Sicily. And what the Romans kept doing, because they believed it was for the good of the state, was re-enlisting in the army and sending out new people to serve as rowers in the navy. Oh, remember, the rowers in the Roman navy were not slaves. They were people who made a wage doing that for a living. And they kept signing up, no matter how many catastrophes happened. So this reveals in the Romans this boundless loyalty to their nation and their belief that their nation is their safety, and that they must sacrifice themselves for the good of all. Some major figures in this war were the Carthaginian king Hannibal Barcas on one side, and on the Roman side, a general by the name of Regulus. The war was very long and exhausted both sides. 264 to 241 is a very long war, and at the end, what the Romans were able to do was exact a humiliating defeat. Not only did they take Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica from the Carthaginians, they made them pay an annual indemnity or fine, which forced the Carthaginians to concentrate a lot of their gross domestic product on sending money to the Romans every year. This would cause fault lines between the Carthaginians and the Romans that would last and ultimately be the roots of the Second Punic War.